The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April 1876, tucked between invoices and bills at the Boston boarding house, where Olivia Jenkins had spent the last 3 miserable months scrubbing floors and dodging the landlady's son. She recognized her cousin Margaret's handwriting immediately, though the envelope bore a Texas postmark that made her heart skip. Inside, she found not Margaret's usual chatty correspondence, but a newspaper clipping and a hastily scrawled note. "Thought you might be interested. Things are desperate here for unmarried women. At least this way you would choose your own fate. Write if you are brave enough, Margaret." The advertisement was simple, almost brutally so. Seeking wife. Mountain man, 30 years of age, owns land near Del Rio, Texas. Hard worker, honest, looking for companionship. Woman must be strong, willing to work, and not afraid of solitude. Write to Zachary Owens, General Delivery, Del Rio, Texas. Olivia read it 3 times before folding it carefully and tucking it into her apron pocket. That night, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen scrubbed, she sat at the tiny desk in her attic room and wrote a response. She told him she was 22, orphaned, capable with cooking and sewing, and willing to travel. She did not tell him about the bruises on her arms from the landlady's son, or the way her stomach cramped from hunger because she gave most of her meager wages to her younger brother's schooling, or the bone-deep weariness that made her feel 40 instead of 22. The response came faster than she expected, just 3 weeks later. His handwriting was surprisingly neat for a mountain man, though the words were spare. "Miss Jenkins, your letter was welcome. I am sending money for train fare to San Antonio and stage fare to Del Rio. If you find me unsuitable upon arrival, I will pay for your return journey. I am not a man of many words or graces, but I am honest and will treat you fairly. Zachary Owens." Tucked inside was a bank draft for an amount that made Olivia's hands shake. It was more money than she had seen in years, enough for the journey and then some. For 3 days she carried the letter with her, reading it during stolen moments, weighing the terrifying unknown against the grinding misery of her present circumstances. On the 4th day, the landlady's son cornered her in the pantry, his hands grabbing at her waist, his breath hot and whiskey sour against her neck. She drove her elbow into his stomach and ran, and that night she packed her single carpetbag and wrote her acceptance to Zachary Owens. The journey took 2 grueling weeks. The train carried her south and west through landscapes that grew increasingly foreign, the green hills of home giving way to flat plains, and eventually to the stark, beautiful emptiness of Texas. San Antonio bustled with life, a chaos of Spanish and English and German, of cowboys and soldiers and merchants. The stage to Del Rio was cramped and hot, bouncing over rutted roads that left her bruised and queasy. She arrived in Del Rio on a blazing afternoon in late June, coated in dust and sweat, her hair falling from its pins and her best dress hopelessly wrinkled. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of adobe and wooden buildings scattered along the Rio Grande. Heat shimmered off the street, and the air smelled of dust and horses and the peculiar green scent of the river. The stage driver helped her down with a knowing look. "You the bride for Zach Owens?" he asked, not unkindly. Olivia's throat was too dry to answer. She nodded. "He is a good man," the driver said, surprising her. "Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. You could do worse." Before she could form a response, a voice rumbled behind her. "Miss Jenkins." Olivia turned and felt her breath catch. The man standing before her was nothing like she had imagined. She had pictured someone rough, crude perhaps, weathered by hard living. The man before her was indeed weathered, his face tanned dark by sun and wind, lines carved around his eyes and mouth. but he was also remarkably, almost alarmingly handsome. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they blocked the sun, arms thick with muscle visible even through his clean cotton shirt. His hair was dark brown, touching his collar, and his eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue that seemed to see right through her. In his large, calloused hands, he held a bouquet of wildflowers, slightly wilted from the heat. Pink evening primrose, yellow huisache blooms, and delicate white rock nettle, clearly picked with care from the harsh landscape. "I brought these," he said, and to her complete astonishment, color rose in his tan cheeks. "I know they are not much. Things do not grow easy out here." His voice was deep and quiet, with a gentleness that did not match his imposing frame. He held the flowers toward her with an expression that could only be described as shy, almost fearful, as though he expected her to laugh or recoil. Olivia reached out and took the bouquet, her fingers brushing his. "They are beautiful," she said, and meant it. "I have never received flowers before." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth entering those remarkable eyes. "Never, never," she confirmed. "Thank you, Mr. Owens." "Zach," he said quickly. "Just Zach. Mr. Owens was my father." He cleared his throat, glancing at her carpetbag. "Is that all you have?" "Yes," he nodded, picking up the bag as though it weighed nothing. "The wagon is just there. It is a few hours' ride to the cabin. We should start before it gets too late." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "There is a hotel here in town. If you want to stay the night first to rest, I can arrange it. Or if you want to talk to the Reverend first before coming out to the place, I understand." The consideration in his voice, the careful way he offered her choices, loosened something tight in Olivia's chest. "I would like to see your home," she said. "Our home, if you will still have me." The smile that broke across his face transformed it entirely, making him look younger, less burdened. "I will have you, Miss Jenkins, if you will have me." The wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 strong horses. Zach helped her up to the seat with the same careful gentleness he had shown with the flowers, his hands firm at her waist, but releasing her the moment she was settled. He climbed up beside her, and they rolled out of town heading northwest, following a road that quickly became little more than a track through scrubland. For the first hour, they rode in silence broken only by the creak of wheels and the clip of hooves. Olivia studied the landscape, so different from anything she had known. The land stretched vast and empty, covered in tough grasses and scattered with mesquite and prickly pear. In the distance, low hills shimmered in the heat. It should have been desolate, but there was a stark beauty to it that caught at her heart. "It is very different from Boston," she said finally. Zach glanced at her, then back at the horses. "I imagined so. Do you hate it?" "No," Olivia said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "It is honest. There is no pretending here." He was quiet for a moment, considering that. "No," he agreed. "The land will not let you pretend. It will show you what you are made of quick enough." "Is that why you like it?" A small smile tugged at his mouth. "Maybe. I grew up in Missouri, but it felt too crowded, too many people all pressed together. I came out here after the war, looking for space to breathe." "You fought?" His jaw tightened. "Yes. For the Union. I do not talk about it much." Olivia nodded, recognizing the weight of things best left unsaid. "My father fought too. He came home different. He died 3 years later." Zach's hand moved as though he might reach for hers, then stopped. "I am sorry. So am I." They fell silent again, but it felt more comfortable now, a shared understanding rather than awkwardness. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the land, the terrain changed. They were climbing gradually into the hills, where juniper and oak began to appear among the mesquite. A creek appeared beside the road, its water clear and inviting. "Almost there," Zach said. There was something nervous in his voice now. "It is not fancy." They rounded a bend, and Olivia saw the cabin. It sat in a small valley where the creek widened into a pool, backed by higher hills covered in juniper. The cabin itself was solidly built of stone and timber, larger than she had expected, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. There was a barn nearby, and a corral where several horses grazed. A vegetable garden, neatly fenced against rabbits and deer, showed green in the evening light. "You built this?" she asked. "Most of it. The stone walls took 2 summers." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, his hands tight on the reins. "It is rough living. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles. Town is a good ride. In summer it gets hot enough to make you wish you were dead, and in winter the northers come through and freeze everything solid. There are rattlesnakes and scorpions and the occasional mountain lion. The work is hard and it never stops." Olivia turned to look at him, this massive, shy man who seemed determined to talk her out of staying. "Why did you place the advertisement, Zach?" He met her eyes, his own suddenly vulnerable. "Because I was tired of being alone. Because I wanted someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share the work and the quiet with. Because I am not good with words or people, but I thought maybe I could be a good husband if I tried." He took a breath. "But it would not be fair to trick you into staying. You should know what you are choosing." "I am choosing you," Olivia said quietly. "I am choosing this. I spent the last 3 years in Boston being hungry and cold and afraid, surrounded by people who did not care if I lived or died. I would rather face rattlesnakes and hard work with an honest man than spend one more day in that life." Something fierce and tender blazed in his eyes. "Then, welcome home, Olivia." He climbed down and came around to help her, and this time when his hands circled her waist, they lingered a moment longer. She placed her hands on his shoulders for balance, feeling the solid strength of him, and when her feet touched the ground they stood very close, breathing the same air. "We should see the Reverend soon," Zach said, his voice rough. "Make it proper." "Yes," Olivia agreed, though she did not step back, and neither did he. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, until one of the horses stamped and broke the spell. Zach stepped back, clearing his throat, and reached for her carpetbag. The inside of the cabin was simple but scrupulously clean. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair, and shelves lined with books. A doorway led to what was clearly Zach's bedroom. Another door opened into a smaller room, empty except for a narrow bed and a trunk. "I thought you could have this room," Zach said, setting her bag on the bed. "Until we are married. After that, well, I can make other arrangements if you prefer, but I hoped—" He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks again. "That we would share your room," Olivia finished. "I hoped that too." The relief on his face was almost comical. "Good, that is good." He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly flustered. "Are you hungry? I made stew this morning." "It is not fancy cooking, but it is filling." "I am starving," Olivia admitted. "But first, might I wash? The journey was very dusty." "Of course. There is a pump out back, and I have a bathing room of sorts. I will heat water." The bathing room turned out to be a small addition off the back of the cabin, with a copper tub and a drain that led outside. Zach filled the tub with water he heated over the fire, refusing her offers to help, and left her with a bar of soap that smelled faintly of pine and a clean towel. Olivia sank into the warm water with a sigh of pure bliss. She could not remember the last time she had bathed in anything other than a basin of cold water. She scrubbed away weeks of travel grime, washed her hair, and emerged feeling more human than she had in months. When she returned to the main room in a clean dress, her hair braided and damp down her back, she found Zach had set the table. The stew was simple but good, rich with meat and vegetables, and there was fresh bread that he admitted somewhat sheepishly he had bought from a Mexican woman in town because his own baking was not fit for consumption. They ate in companionable silence at first, the strangeness of sitting across from each other in this intimate domestic scene not lost on either of them. Finally, Olivia said, "Tell me about the land. What do you do here?" Zach's face lit up, his earlier shyness fading as he talked about something he clearly loved. "I run cattle, though not as many as some of the bigger outfits. The land here is good for grazing if you know where the water is. I also break horses, which is steadier money. The army always needs good mounts, and some of the ranchers will pay well for a horse that is properly trained." He gestured out the window. "I have about 300 acres, most of it in the hills. There is a spring higher up that feeds the creek, so we do not run dry even in bad summers." "We," Olivia repeated softly, savoring the word. His eyes met hers. "We," he confirmed, "if you stay." "I am staying, Zach." He reached across the table, his large hand dwarfing hers as he took it gently. "I am not good at this," he said, "at talking, at courting. I do not know the right words or the right things to do, but I promise I will work hard to make you happy. I will never raise a hand to you in anger. I will provide for you and protect you as best I can. And I will try every day to be worthy of the trust you are placing in me." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "That is more than I ever hoped for," she whispered. "And Zach, you already are worthy. You brought me flowers when you could have brought nothing. You offered me choices when you could have demanded obedience. You are a good man, I see that." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture achingly tender. "Then we will be good to each other," he said. They were married 4 days later in Del Rio by Reverend Matthews, a jovial man who seemed pleased to see Zach settling down. Olivia wore her best dress, mended and pressed, and Zach wore a suit that looked slightly too tight across his massive shoulders but was clearly the finest he owned. He had picked more wildflowers that morning, and Olivia carried them as they spoke their vows. Margaret had come to stand with them, her presence a welcome reminder that Olivia was not entirely alone in this new land. Her cousin was a few years older, weathered by frontier life but happy with her husband, a shopkeeper in Del Rio. "You are sure about this?" Margaret whispered as they waited for the reverend to begin. Olivia looked at Zach, who stood ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I have never been more sure of anything." The ceremony was brief. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Zach cupped her face in his large hands with infinite care and kissed her gently, almost reverently. It was Olivia's first kiss, and she felt it all the way to her toes. They had a simple meal at the hotel restaurant, Margaret and her husband Samuel joining them, and then rode back to the cabin in the wagon as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Olivia had been nervous about the wedding night, her only knowledge gleaned from whispered conversations among the other maids in Boston. But Zach seemed even more nervous than she was. He carried her over the threshold, setting her down carefully in the main room, and then stood there looking lost. "I do not want to frighten you," he said finally. "We can wait if you prefer." Olivia stepped close to him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. "I am not frightened, not of you, never of me," he said fiercely. "I swear it, Olivia, never." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble under her palm. "Then show me how to be your wife." What followed was awkward and tender, and unlike anything Olivia had imagined. Zach was infinitely patient, his big hands gentle as he helped her from her dress, his kisses slow and thorough. When he carried her to the bed, she saw that he had spread it with wildflowers, their scent perfuming the air. She might have laughed at the romantic gesture, except she was too busy falling in love with this shy mountain man who had opened his door and his heart to her. In the morning, Olivia woke to the smell of coffee and burning bacon. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Zach at the stove, scowling at a pan of hopelessly charred meat. "I am no good at this," he said, looking up with chagrin. "I can hunt and butcher and cook over a campfire, but cooking in the house defeats me." Olivia bit back a smile and moved to the stove. You should tend the animals." Relief washed over his face. "You will not mind the cooking and such. It is work that needs doing, same as tending the animals. We will each do what we are best at." She shooed him toward the door. "Go on. I will have a proper breakfast ready when you return." He paused at the door, looking back at her with such warmth in his eyes that her breath caught. "Thank you, Olivia." "For what?" "For being here. For being you." Then he was gone, and Olivia was alone in her new home. She looked around the cabin, at the simple furniture and bare walls, at the well-stocked pantry and the clean, swept floors. It was nothing like the grand houses she had worked in Boston, but it was hers, theirs. And for the first time in years, she felt something very much like happiness. The first weeks of marriage passed in a blur of new routines and small discoveries. Olivia learned the rhythm of life on the ranch, rising with the sun to prepare breakfast while Zach tended the animals. After the meal, she would work in the garden or preserve food or mend clothes, while Zach worked with the horses or rode out to check on the cattle. In the afternoons, when the heat became oppressive, they would rest, and Olivia often found Zach reading, his big frame folded into the rocking chair, his expression absorbed. She had not expected him to be educated, but his shelves held Shakespeare and Plutarch, philosophy and poetry. "My mother was a teacher," he explained one afternoon when she asked. "She made sure I could read before she died. Books were company when people were not." They would have supper together as the day cooled, and afterward they would sit on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Zach was not talkative, but Olivia learned to read his silences, to understand the difference between comfortable quiet and troubled brooding. Slowly, carefully, he began to open up to her, sharing bits of his past, his dreams for the ranch, his fears that he was not enough for her. "You are more than enough," she told him one night as they sat together on the porch, her hand in his. "You are everything I needed, Zach, everything I did not even know to hope for." He turned to her, his eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "I am falling in love with you, Olivia. I think I started the moment I saw you step off that stage, all brave and beautiful and trying so hard not to show you were scared." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But then you gave me flowers and you blushed, and I thought maybe everything would be all right after all." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. "I am falling in love with you too, with your gentleness and your strength, with the way you read poetry and break horses, with the way you look at me like I am something precious." He pulled her into his lap, cradling her against his broad chest. "You are precious. To me, you are everything." They kissed then, slow and deep, and when he carried her to bed, it was with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Summer deepened into July and August, the heat fierce and relentless. Olivia learned to move slowly in the worst of it, to appreciate the cool of the stone cabin and the relief of evening. She learned which plants in the garden needed extra water, which herbs could be used for cooking and medicine. She learned to make soap and candles, to cure meat and preserve vegetables. The work was endless, but it was satisfying in a way her Boston labors had never been. This was work for herself and Zach, building their life together. In late August, a neighbor rode up one afternoon, a grizzled man named Tom Carter who owned the spread to the north. Olivia had met him briefly at the general store in town, and Zach had said he was a fair man, if rough around the edges. "Afternoon, Zach, Mrs. Owens," Tom said, tipping his hat to Olivia. "I have got a problem and I am hoping you might help." "What kind of problem?" Zach asked, his tone cautious. "Raiders hit my place last night. Mexicans, I think, though I could not swear to it. They ran off about 20 head and shot one of my men when he tried to stop them. I'm getting a group together to go after them. Thought you might want in, seeing as how they will likely hit other places if they are not stopped." Zach's jaw tightened. "I am sorry about your man, Tom. But I do not think I can help." Tom's eyes narrowed. "You afraid? That is not like you, Zach." "I am not afraid," Zach said evenly. "I am married now. I have responsibilities here. All the more reason to stop these raiders before they come for your stock, or worse." Tom glanced at Olivia, his meaning clear. Olivia felt a chill despite the heat. She had heard stories of raids, of violence along the border. But she had also seen the way Zach's hands sometimes shook when thunder rolled, the nightmares that occasionally woke him gasping. He had seen enough violence in the war. She would not ask him to seek more. "I can defend my own place if needed," Zach said, his voice hard now. "But I am not riding out looking for a fight. Find someone else." Tom spat into the dust. "Guess marriage has made you soft. Shame. I thought you were made of sterner stuff." He wheeled his horse around and rode off without another word. Zach stood very still, his hands clenched at his sides. Olivia went to him, slipping her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "Thank you," she said quietly. He turned in her embrace, his eyes troubled. "You think I am a coward. I think you are brave enough to refuse something you know is wrong. Riding out after raiders, that is how men get killed and feuds get started. You have built something good here, Zach. You do not owe Tom Carter your life." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I killed enough men in the war. I swore when it was over that I would not kill again unless I had no other choice. Then you made the right choice today." They heard no more about the raiders, though rumor in town had it that Tom and his men had ridden south into Mexico and come back empty-handed. Tom Carter did not speak to Zach when they passed in town, but Olivia counted that as no great loss. September brought cooler weather and a sense of relief. The garden was in full harvest, and Olivia spent long days putting up vegetables for the winter. Zach helped when he could, his massive hands surprisingly deft at snapping beans or shelling peas. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, or sometimes Olivia would sing old songs her mother had taught her, and Zach would listen with a soft smile on his face. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the first stars appear, Zach said, "You seem happy." "I am happy," Olivia said, surprised by how much she meant it. "Are you?" "I did not know I could be this happy," he admitted. "I spent so many years alone, convincing myself I did not need anyone, that solitude was enough. But being with you, Olivia, it is like coming home to a place I did not know I was missing." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I know exactly what you mean." In October, the northers began to blow through, cold winds that came down from the plains and made the evenings chill. Olivia was glad for the stone walls of the cabin and the warmth of the fireplace. She was also increasingly glad for the warmth of Zach's body beside her at night, the way he would pull her close and tuck her against his chest, surrounding her with heat and strength. It was during one of these cold nights that she realized her monthly courses were late. Not just a day or two, but more than a week. She lay awake, pressed against Zach's sleeping form, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, and felt a mixture of joy and terror. She said nothing for another week, waiting to be sure. When nearly a month had passed with no sign, She could no longer keep it to herself. She waited until after supper, when they were settled before the fire, Zach reading and Olivia ostensibly mending a shirt. "Zach," she said, her voice not quite steady, "I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, concern crossing his face at her tone. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least, I hope nothing is wrong. I believe I am with child." The book slid from his hands, unnoticed, to the floor. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he did not move or speak, and Olivia felt fear begin to curl in her stomach. "Zach, say something, please." He crossed to her in 2 long strides, dropping to his knees before her chair. His large hands came up to frame her face, and she saw tears in his eyes. "A child," he breathed. "Our child." "Yes," she whispered. "Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, the sound choked. "Olivia, I never thought I would have this. A wife, a family. I thought I was too rough, too broken by the war, but you have given me everything. You have given me a reason to build something that will last beyond my own life." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you." "Thank you." Relief flooded through her, followed by joy so intense it brought tears to her own eyes. "I was afraid you might not want it, that it might be too soon." "Too soon." He sat back on his heels, his hands moving to rest gently on her stomach. "I want this more than I can say. I want to meet the child we made together, to raise them to be strong and kind. I want to teach them to ride and to read, to love this land and to know they are loved." Olivia pulled him up into the chair with her, a feat that should have been impossible except that Zach was always careful to give her what she wanted. She curled against him, his arms tight around her, and they sat together in the firelight, planning their future. The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Olivia tired more quickly and found certain smells revolting. Zach became absurdly protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, which she found both endearing and frustrating. "I am with child, not dying," she said one afternoon when he tried to take the laundry basket from her hands. "I can still do my work." "I know, but you should rest. Save your strength." "Zach, women have been having babies while running households since the beginning of time. I promise to stop if I get too tired." He looked unconvinced but let her keep the basket. He did, however, insist on doing more of the heavy work himself and on riding into town to fetch anything she mentioned wanting. When she offhandedly mentioned craving apples, he rode the 6 hours to Del Rio and back to buy her a bushel, returning long after dark with the apples and a jar of honey. "You did not have to do that," she said, touched beyond words. "I wanted to," he said simply. "You are carrying our child." "It is the least I can do." Winter came, milder than the northern winters Olivia had known, but still cold enough to make her grateful for the warmth of the cabin. They spent long evenings by the fire, Zach reading aloud while Olivia sewed tiny clothes for the baby. Her belly swelled, and she felt the first flutters of movement that gradually strengthened into proper kicks. The first time Zach felt the baby move, his face lit up with such wonder that Olivia wanted to freeze the moment forever. He would often rest his hand on her belly, talking to the child in a low, rumbling voice, telling them about the ranch and the horses and how much they were already loved. In February, Margaret came to stay, planning to be there for the birth. She arrived with her own 2 children, a boy of 4 and a girl just turning 2, and the cabin was suddenly full of noise and life. Zach took to the children immediately, his gentle patience perfect for their endless questions and energy. Watching him swing the little boy up onto his shoulders or carefully help the girl feed carrots to the horses, Olivia fell in love with him all over again. "He is going to be a wonderful father," Margaret said one afternoon as they watched Zach build a toy barn for the boy out of spare wood. "I know," Olivia said softly. "I am so lucky, Margaret. I never imagined I could have this." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You deserve it. You deserve every bit of happiness." The baby came on a cold night in early March after a labor that lasted through the night and into the following day. Margaret served as midwife, her experience and calm demeanor keeping Olivia grounded through the pain. Zach was banished to the barn, though they could hear him pacing, the sound of his boots a steady rhythm beneath Olivia's gasps and cries. When the baby finally came, a healthy boy with a thick shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his displeasure at the world, Margaret wrapped him quickly and placed him in Olivia's arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling through tears. "A beautiful, perfect son." Olivia looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature in her arms and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "He is perfect," she whispered. "Get Zach. Please get Zach." Margaret went to the door and called out, and moments later Zach burst into the room, his face pale with fear and hope. He stopped at the bedside, staring down at Olivia and the baby. "A boy," Olivia said. "We have a son, Zach." He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his hand reaching out tentatively to touch the baby's tiny fist. The baby immediately gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Zach made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He is so small," Zach said wonderingly. "How can anything be this small and perfect? Do you want to hold him?" Zach looked terrified. "I might hurt him. My hands are too rough." "Your hands are perfect," Olivia said. "Please, Zach, hold your son." With infinite care, Zach took the baby, cradling him against his broad chest as though he held the most precious thing in the world. Which, Olivia supposed, he did. The baby quieted immediately, apparently content in his father's strong arms, and Zach stared down at him with an expression of such fierce love and protectiveness that Olivia felt tears stream down her cheeks. "Hello, little one," Zach murmured. "I am your father. I am going to love you and protect you every day of my life. You and your mother, you are my whole world." They named him James, after Olivia's father, with the middle name Thomas, after Zach's. Jamie, they called him, and he ruled the household with his tiny fists and lusty cries. Zach proved to be exactly the father Olivia had known he would be, endlessly patient with the baby's demands, rising in the night to bring Jamie to Olivia for feeding, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, singing to him in a surprisingly tuneful baritone. Margaret stayed for 2 weeks before returning to Del Rio with her own children, promising to visit soon. Olivia and Zach settled into their new life as parents, exhausted but happier than Olivia had ever imagined possible. Spring came, bringing wildflowers and new grass and the arrival of new foals in the pasture. Jamie was 3 months old, fat and healthy, and had begun to smile, a gummy, joyful expression that made even the hardest days worthwhile. Olivia would take him out to the porch in the afternoons, and they would watch Zach work with the horses, Jamie's eyes tracking his father's movements with apparent fascination. One evening in late April, almost exactly a year after Olivia had first arrived in Del Rio, they sat on the porch together, Jamie asleep in Olivia's arms, and watched the sunset paint the sky. "You ever regret it?" Zach asked quietly. "Answering the advertisement. Coming all this way to marry a stranger." Olivia turned to look at him, this strong, gentle man who had given her everything she had never dared to dream of. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Do you regret placing it?" "My only regret is that I did not do it sooner, so I could have had more time with you." He reached over and took her free hand. "You have made me happier than I knew a man could be, Olivia. You and Jamie, you are the best things that ever happened to me." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Olivia said. I expected a stranger at best, someone hard and difficult at worst. Instead, you opened the door with flowers and a shy smile, and you have been opening your heart to me ever since." He leaned in and kissed her, soft and sweet, while Jamie slept peacefully between them and the Texas sky blazed with color above. The months that followed were not without challenges. In June, a drought threatened the grazing land, and Zach spent long days moving cattle to areas where grass still grew. In August, a rattlesnake bit one of the horses, and despite Zach's best efforts, the animal died. In September, Olivia came down with a fever that had Zach riding frantically to Del Rio for the doctor, who pronounced it a bad cold and prescribed rest. But through all of it, they had each other. When Zach came in exhausted from fighting the drought, Olivia had a meal ready and a sympathetic ear. When Olivia was sick, Zach cared for both her and Jamie with tireless devotion. They were partners in every sense of the word, facing the challenges of frontier life together. Jamie grew and thrived, learning to crawl and then to pull himself up on furniture, his personality emerging more each day. He had Zach's gray-blue eyes and Olivia's quick smile, and he adored his father with a devotion that made Olivia's heart swell. Zach would come in from a long day of work, and Jamie would shriek with delight, crawling toward him at top speed. Zach would scoop him up and toss him in the air, catching him securely, while Jamie laughed with pure joy. "You have created a monster," Olivia said one evening, watching Zach play with an increasingly excited Jamie. "He will never sleep now." "Just a few more minutes," Zach pleaded, and Olivia could not help but smile at the sight of her two boys, so clearly besotted with each other. By the time Jamie reached his first birthday in March of 1878, Olivia was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, with more sickness and exhaustion. Zach hired a woman from town to come help with the heavy housework, despite Olivia's protests that they could not afford it. "We can afford it," he said firmly. "The horse breaking has been good this year, and I sold a nice string of cattle. You need help, Olivia. Let me provide it." The second baby, another boy they named Robert, arrived in November. He was smaller than Jamie had been, and the birth was more difficult, leaving Olivia weak and shaken. For several weeks, Zach insisted she do nothing but rest and care for the baby, while he managed everything else with the help of the hired woman and, surprisingly, Margaret, who packed up her family and came to stay for a month. "Family helps family," Margaret said when Olivia tried to thank her. "Besides, Samuel can manage the store without me for a while, and the children love being here." Slowly, Olivia regained her strength. Robert proved to be a quieter baby than Jamie had been, content to watch the world with solemn, dark eyes. Jamie, now a toddler, was fascinated by his little brother, wanting to help with everything and occasionally needing to be gently redirected when his enthusiasm became too much. Zach somehow managed to care for Olivia, entertain Jamie, help with Robert, and still keep the ranch running. Olivia watched him in awe, this mountain man who had opened the door with flowers and continued to show her, every single day, what love looked like in action. "I do not know how you do it all," she said one night as they finally collapsed into bed. "I do it for you," he said simply. "For our family. That is all the reason I need." The years rolled on, each bringing its own joys and challenges. In 1880, their first daughter was born, Clara, with Olivia's dark hair and a temper that could match her father's stubbornness. The ranch grew as Zach bought adjacent land from a neighbor who was moving back east. Jamie started learning to ride, sitting in front of Zach on one of the gentler horses, his face alight with joy. Robert showed an early love of books, and Zach began teaching him to read almost as soon as he could talk. In 1882, another daughter arrived, Helen, sweet-tempered and gentle. In 1884, their last child, a boy they named Daniel, completed their family. The cabin that had once seemed spacious now bulged at the seams with children and life and love. They added on to the cabin, building new rooms to house their growing family. The walls were covered in drawings the children made, and the shelves held an increasing collection of books, toys, and the accumulated treasures of family life. The silence that Zach had once cherished was replaced by the constant noise of children playing, arguing, laughing, and the house rang with life in a way that made his heart full. Olivia, watching him read to all 5 children one evening, the smaller ones piled in his lap and the older ones pressed against his sides, felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This man, this gentle giant who had advertised for a wife because he was lonely, had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. Later, after the children were finally in bed and they had a rare moment of quiet, she said, "Do you remember the day I arrived, when you gave me those wildflowers? I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Zach said, pulling her into his arms. "I remember being terrified you would take one look at me and get back on the stage. I remember thinking you were nothing like I expected. I expected someone rough, maybe even cruel. Instead, you were gentle and shy and so clearly nervous that it made me brave. The best decision I ever made was placing that advertisement," Zach said. "The second best was picking those flowers. The best decision I ever made was answering it," Olivia said. "And getting off the stage even though I was terrified." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and when they made their way to bed, it was with the comfortable intimacy of 2 people who had built a life together through love and work and unwavering commitment. By 1890, their oldest children were growing up. Jamie, at 12, was already showing signs of inheriting his father's size and strength. He worked alongside Zach daily, learning the ranch work with the same quiet competence his father showed. Robert, at 10, had his nose perpetually in a book when he was not helping with chores, and was already talking about becoming a teacher. Clara, at 8, could ride better than many grown men and had declared she was going to have her own ranch someday. Helen, 6, and Daniel, 4, were still young enough to be more play than work, though they helped in small ways. Olivia looked at her brood and marveled at how full her life had become. The girl who had arrived in Del Rio with a single carpet bag and a heart full of fear was gone, replaced by a woman confident in her place in the world, secure in her husband's love, and surrounded by the family they had built together. The ranch had prospered under Zach's careful management. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, with money set aside for the children's futures and the certainty that they would never go hungry. Zach's reputation as a horse trainer had spread, and people came from as far as San Antonio to buy his animals. One afternoon in late spring, a familiar figure rode up to the cabin. Tom Carter, who had not spoken to them in years, sat atop his horse, looking older and more worn than Olivia remembered. Zach stepped out onto the porch, and Olivia stood beside him, their oldest children clustering behind them. Tom dismounted slowly, holding his hat in his hands. "Zach, Mrs. Owens, I wondered if I might speak with you a moment." "Speak," Zach said, his voice neutral. Tom cleared his throat. "I came to apologize. Years ago, I said some things that were not right, called you a coward for not riding out with us after those raiders. I was angry about losing my man and my cattle, and I took it out on you." "Why the apology now?" Zach asked. "Because I have had years to think on it. Because I lost 2 more men in foolish raids trying to settle scores that should have been left alone. Because I see you here with your family and your prosperous ranch, and I realize you were the smart one. You built something that lasts. I chased ghosts and revenge. He looked at Olivia. You were right to stop him from riding with us, madam. A man's first duty is to his family. I did not stop him, Olivia said quietly. Zach made his own choice, but I was grateful for it then, and I am grateful for it now. Tom nodded. I do not expect we will be friends, Zach. But I wanted you to know I was wrong, and I am sorry for it. Apology accepted, Zach said. He did not offer his hand, and Tom did not expect it. With a final nod, Tom mounted his horse and rode away. Was that man mean to you, Papa? Clara asked when he was gone. He was angry once, a long time ago, Zach said, pulling her against his side. But holding anger only hurts the person carrying it. Better to let it go. That evening, after the children were in bed, Olivia and Zach sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was soft with the promise of summer. 14 years, Olivia said softly. 14 years since I stepped off that stage. The best 14 years of my life, Zach said, taking her hand. Mine too. She leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horse and leather and sun-warmed skin. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not answered the advertisement, or if I had gotten back on the stage after seeing how remote the ranch was? I try not to, Zach admitted. The thought of life without you and the children, it is unbearable. I used to dream of escaping Boston, Olivia said, of finding somewhere I belonged, but I never imagined this. A husband who loves me, children who fill every corner of my heart, a home that is truly mine. You gave me all of that, Zach. We gave it to each other, he corrected. I was just a lonely man in the hills before you came. You made this a home, Olivia. You made me whole. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Inside, their children slept safely, and around them, the ranch that they had built together breathed in the night. The years that followed were gentler, as the hard work of building a life gave way to the satisfaction of maintaining and growing what they had created. Jamie grew into a young man as strong and capable as his father, and began courting a neighbor's daughter, a sweet girl named Anna who fit into the family as though she had always been there. They married when Jamie was 20 and began building a cabin on the northern portion of the ranch land, starting a second Owens homestead. Robert left for college in Austin, determined to become a teacher as he had always planned. It was the first time the family had been separated, and Olivia cried when he left, though she was fiercely proud of him. He came home every summer, full of stories about his studies and the wider world, and each time Zach would listen with quiet pride, glad his son had opportunities he had never had. Clara, true to her word, showed no interest in marriage, preferring to work with her father breaking horses. She was as good as any man at the work, and Zach treated her as an equal partner, teaching her everything he knew. Buyers sometimes balked at dealing with a woman, but Clara had inherited her father's stubborn determination and her mother's sharp tongue, and she soon won them over. Helen married a young rancher from Del Rio and moved just a few miles away, close enough to visit often with the grandchildren that soon followed. Daniel, the baby, grew up with a love of the land as deep as his father's and declared he would never leave the ranch, that he would work it alongside his father and then inherit it when Zach was too old to manage it anymore. Too old, Zach said, ruffling Daniel's hair. I am not planning on being too old anytime soon, son. But time moved on regardless of plans. Zach's hair, once solidly dark, showed increasing amounts of silver. Lines deepened around his eyes and mouth, though Olivia thought they only made him more handsome, distinguished. Her own hair was streaked with gray, and her body bore the marks of bearing 5 children and a life of hard work. But when Zach looked at her, his eyes still held the same warmth and desire they had held on their wedding night, and she knew he saw not the passage of time but the accumulation of love. In 1895, their first grandchild was born, Jamie and Anna's daughter. Holding the tiny girl, Zach had tears in his eyes, and Olivia understood completely. The circle was continuing, another generation beginning on the land they had built together. They were sitting on the porch one evening in the spring of 1899, grandchildren playing in the yard under Clara's watchful eye, when Olivia said, "Do you remember what you promised me the day I arrived, when we sat at dinner that first night?" Zach thought for a moment. "I promised to work hard to make you happy, to never raise a hand to you in anger, to provide and protect, to try every day to be worthy of your trust. You have kept every one of those promises," Olivia said softly. "Every single day for 23 years. It was easy," Zach said. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I ever did. I love you, Zachary Owens. I loved you when you opened that door with wildflowers and a shy smile. I loved you when you helped me down from the wagon and when you spoke our vows. I loved you when you held Jamie for the first time and when you built additions to the house for our growing family. I love you now, with your silver hair and the grandchildren playing at our feet, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Zach pulled her close, kissing her temple. "And I love you, Olivia Owens. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, you and our children and this life we have built together. I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement, that you were brave enough to travel all this way to give a lonely mountain man a chance." "You were never a beast," Olivia said, remembering her fears on that long journey to Del Rio. "You were always this, a gentle man with a huge heart and hands that know how to care for the things he loves." They sat together as the sun set, surrounded by the sounds of family and life. The ranch spread out around them like a promise kept. The girl from Boston and the mountain man from Missouri had found each other across distance and uncertainty, had built a love that weathered drought and hardship and the simple daily challenges of life. They had raised children who carried their values forward, who loved the land and each other with the same devotion their parents had shown. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Zach said, "If I had it to do over again, I would not change a single thing. Well, except maybe I would have picked better flowers that first day. They were pretty wilted." Olivia laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when she was 22. "They were perfect. Everything was perfect. Everything has been perfect." "Not perfect," Zach corrected gently, "but real and ours and built with love. That is better than perfect." She could not argue with that. So instead, she leaned against his solid warmth, listened to the laughter of their grandchildren, and thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her to Del Rio, Texas on that blazing day in 1876, to step off a stage and into the arms of a mountain man holding wildflowers. The years rolled on, as years do, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that make up a life fully lived. In 1902, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a gathering of their children and grandchildren, a crowd so large it spilled out of the cabin and across the yard. Zach, now 56 and still impressively strong despite the silver in his hair, looked around at the assembled family with wonder. "All this," he said to Olivia as they stood together watching the festivities, "from a simple advertisement in a newspaper." "Not from the advertisement," Olivia corrected. "From the love we built together." Robert had traveled home from Austin, where he now taught at a school and had married a fellow teacher. He brought his wife and 2 young sons, and Olivia delighted in seeing how much the boys favored her own father, whose name they carried forward. Jamie and Anna had 4 children now, ranging from 7 years to 7 months, and their cabin had grown to accommodate the expanding family. Helen and her husband had 3 children and another on the way. Even Clara, who had sworn she would never marry, had surprised everyone by falling in love with a horse trader from San Antonio and marrying him in a quiet ceremony the previous year. Daniel, now 18 and grown nearly as large as his father, was courting seriously and spoke often of wanting to add to the family legacy. Looking at the crowd of children and grandchildren, at the prosperous ranch that had grown from Zach's original 300 acres to nearly 1,000, at the barns and corrals, and the small cemetery on the hill where they had laid neighbors and friends to rest over the years, Olivia felt the weight of their accomplishment. They had built not just a life but a dynasty, a family that would carry their values forward into a new century. That night, after everyone had left or been bedded down in various corners of the expanded house, Zach and Olivia walked out to the creek where the cabin first stood. The moon was bright overhead, turning the water to silver. "You remember the first night I spent here?" Olivia asked. "How nervous we both were. I remember thinking I did not deserve you, that you would realize your mistake and leave as soon as you could." Zach pulled her into his arms. "I am glad you proved me wrong. I am glad you gave me flowers and showed me who you really were from the very beginning, a gentle man with a good heart." They kissed in the moonlight, and if the passion was tempered now by years and familiarity, it was deeper and richer for it, rooted in a love that had been tested and proven time and again. The new century brought changes to the frontier. Del Rio was growing, connected now by railroad to the wider world. Automobiles began to appear, though Zach declared them a foolish fad and stuck with his horses. The old ways were passing, but on the Owens ranch, the rhythms of life remained much the same. There were cattle to tend, horses to break, fences to mend, and land to care for. In 1905, Zach developed a cough that would not go away. Olivia insisted he see the doctor in Del Rio, and he finally agreed, more to stop her worrying than from any real concern. The doctor, a young man who had taken over old Doc Hendrick's practice, examined him thoroughly and pronounced him essentially sound, though he recommended Zach slow down a bit. "Slow down," Zach grumbled on the ride home. "I am only 59. I am not ancient yet." "No," Olivia agreed, though privately she had noticed how he tired more easily now, how he sometimes let Daniel handle the harder physical work. "But there is no shame in letting our sons and sons-in-law take on more of the burden. You have earned some rest." He did slow down, though grudgingly. He spent more time with the grandchildren, teaching them to ride and to read, passing on his knowledge and his values. The children adored him, this big, gentle grandfather who could lift them high and who always had time for their questions and games. One afternoon in the summer of 1908, Olivia found Zach sitting on the porch with their youngest grandchild, a 3-year-old girl named Olivia after her grandmother. Little Livy was nestled against Zach's chest, listening raptly as he told her stories about the early days of the ranch. "And then your grandmother arrived," Zach was saying, "and she was the bravest, most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I was so nervous I could barely speak." "Why were you nervous, Grandpa?" Livy asked. "Because I was afraid she would not like me. I am just a rough old mountain man after all." "But Grandma loves you," Livy said with the absolute certainty of a child. "Yes, she does, and I love her more than anything in the world except all of you grandchildren." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. She had been loved by this man for over 30 years now, had built a life and a family with him, and still he could move her to tears with his simple declarations. That evening, after Livy had been collected by her parents and the house was quiet, Zach said. "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am, how blessed we have been." He took her hand. "Not everyone gets what we have, Olivia. A love that lasts, children who honor us, a life built on honest work and shared dreams. We have been blessed beyond measure." "We have," she agreed. "Though I think we also worked hard for it. Love is not just luck, Zach. It is choice, made over and over again every day." "And I would choose you every day for 1,000 years," he said. In the fall of 1910, they received word that Tom Carter had died, leaving his ranch to a nephew from back east who promptly sold it to a large cattle outfit. The old ways were truly passing, the independent ranchers being absorbed into larger operations or selling out to move to the cities. "Will our children keep the ranch?" Olivia asked one evening. "Or will they sell too?" "Jamie and Daniel will keep it," Zach said with certainty. "They love the land like I do, and Clara is teaching her husband the horse breeding business. I think at least part of what we built will last." He was right. In 1912, they formally divided the ranch between Jamie, Daniel, and Clara's husband, keeping a small portion around the original cabin for themselves. It was good to see the next generation taking ownership, making their own decisions about how to manage the land while still honoring the foundation Zach had laid. Zach was 66 now, his body finally showing the wear of decades of hard work. His hands, once so strong and sure, sometimes trembled with what the doctor called palsy. He moved more slowly, though he stubbornly insisted on doing at least some work every day. Olivia, at 58, had her own aches and pains, but she still managed the household and delighted in the ever-growing crowd of grandchildren. They had 13 grandchildren now, ranging from 19 to 3 years old, with more on the way. The family gatherings required careful planning and a great deal of food, but Olivia loved every chaotic minute of them. This was what she had built with Zach, this sprawling network of love and family. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1916, the entire family gathered once more. Zach and Olivia sat in places of honor at the long tables set up in the yard, surrounded by their children's spouses, and a horde of grandchildren. Jamie stood to make a toast, his own hair beginning to show silver now, though he was only 38. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us by example what love and commitment really mean, who built this ranch from nothing and raised us to value hard work, honesty, and family above all else. May they enjoy many more years together, and may we honor their legacy by living as they have lived." There were tears and cheers, and then Olivia stood, surprising everyone. "I want to say something," she said. 40 years ago, I stepped off a stage in Del Rio, scared and uncertain, with nothing but a carpetbag and a wild hope that I might have made the right choice. And then your father opened the door, this big, supposedly rough mountain man, and he held wildflowers and he smiled so shyly I knew everything would be all right." She looked at Zach, her eyes bright with tears. "He gave me flowers then, and he has been giving me his heart every day since. This family, this ranch, this beautiful life we have, it all began with that simple gesture of kindness and love. I could not have asked for a better partner, a better father for my children, or a better life than the one we have built together. I love you, Zachary Owens, today and always." Zach stood, pulling her into his arms right there in front of everyone. "And I love you, Olivia Owens. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed, and their family erupted in cheers and applause, the grandchildren giggling and making exaggerated gagging sounds that only made their elders laugh. The war in Europe cast its shadow even to their corner of Texas. Robert's eldest son, now 20 and idealistic, enlisted and shipped out in 1917. The family gathered to see him off, Zach pulling the boy aside for a long, private conversation. When they emerged, the boy's eyes were red but his shoulders were straight. "What did you tell him?" Olivia asked later. "The truth about war, that it changes you, that you see things you can never forget, but also that he has family waiting for him, that he has a home to come back to, and that he should hold on to that when things get dark." Zach's voice was rough. "And I told him to come home, because I could not bear to lose any of our grandsons." The boy did come home in 1919, carrying wounds both visible and invisible. But he was alive, and the family welcomed him back with open arms, giving him time and space to heal. Zach spent long hours with him, talking quietly, and Olivia recognized the same gentle patience he had shown their own children over the years. The 1920s brought prosperity to the ranch. The horse breeding program Clara and her husband had developed was renowned throughout Texas, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase their stock. Jamie's cattle operation thrived, and Daniel proved to have a gift for the business side of ranching, managing sales and contracts with skill. Zach and Olivia, now in their 70s, had officially retired from active work, though they still supervised and advised. They spent their days tending a small garden, reading and enjoying their grandchildren, of whom there were now 18, plus 3 great-grandchildren. "Can you believe it?" Olivia said one afternoon as they sat on the porch, watching a gaggle of small children play in the yard under Clara's supervision. "Great-grandchildren, we are ancient, Zach. Speak for yourself," he said, though his grin took any sting from the words. "I am timeless." She laughed, the sound still bright despite her years. "You are ridiculous, and I love you. Good. I would hate to think I was keeping you here against your will. Never that. There is nowhere else I would rather be." In the spring of 1926, exactly 50 years after Olivia had first arrived in Del Rio, the family planned a massive celebration. All of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren would gather, along with friends and neighbors, to celebrate Zach and Olivia's 50th wedding anniversary and the founding of what had become the Owens family dynasty. The preparations took months. A pavilion was built to shade the guests from the Texas sun. Food was prepared in massive quantities. Someone even hired a photographer from San Antonio to document the event. On the day itself, Olivia woke early, pressed against Zach's familiar warmth. He was 79 now, his body finally frail in a way it had never been before, though his mind remained sharp. She was 72, her own body marked by age and hard use, but still strong enough to do what needed doing. 50 years, she whispered. "Can you believe it has been 50 years? "Best 50 years of my life," Zach said, rolling to face her. "Would you do it again? If you could go back to that girl in Boston, would you tell her to answer the advertisement in a heartbeat?" Olivia said without hesitation. "Would you place it again? Every time?" "Though maybe I would have picked better flowers," she laughed. "The flowers were perfect. Everything was perfect." They dressed with care, Olivia in a new dress that Clara had bought her from a shop in San Antonio, Zach in the suit he had been married in, altered now to fit his leaner frame. When they emerged from the cabin hand in hand, the yard was already filling with people. The celebration lasted all day and into the evening. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, music and dancing. The photographer captured it all, image after image of the sprawling Owens family, united by the love of two people who had taken a chance on each other half a century before. As the sun began to set, Zach pulled Olivia away from the crowd, leading her down to the creek where they had stood so many times over the years. "I want to tell you something," he said, taking both her hands in his. "Something I have never quite put into words." "What is it?" "When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for companionship, someone to share the work and the solitude. I thought that would be enough." He raised one trembling hand to cup her cheek. "I had no idea it was possible to love someone the way I love you. To wake up every morning grateful that you are beside me, to go through my days thinking about you, to know that everything I am and everything I have is better because you are part of it. You did not just answer my advertisement, Olivia. You answered every prayer I never knew how to speak." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. "And you gave me a life when mine had become unbearable. You gave me safety and love and a family. You gave me purpose and partnership and joy. I was broken when I came here, Zach, even if I did not know it. You made me whole." They kissed as they had kissed 1,000 times before, but this kiss tasted of salt and joy and 50 years of shared life. When they finally drew apart, the sun had set, and the stars were beginning to emerge. "Come on," Olivia said, taking his hand. "Our family is waiting." They walked back to the celebration together, the mountain man and the woman who had answered his advertisement, and they danced under the stars while their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren watched and smiled. This was what they had built from flowers and a shy smile, from courage and trust and daily acts of love. This was their legacy, and it would endure long after they were gone, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over fear, commitment over convenience, and partnership over solitude. As Olivia rested her head against Zach's shoulder, swaying to the music, she closed her eyes and gave thanks for that advertisement, for her own bravery in answering it, and most of all for the gentle giant who had opened his door with wildflowers and his heart, and given her everything she had never dared to dream of wanting. In the end, it had all been so simple. She had expected a beast and found instead a man of uncommon kindness and strength. And from that beginning, they had built something beautiful, something that would last far beyond their own lives. As they danced beneath the Texas stars, surrounded by the family their love had created, Olivia knew that her story, their story, was exactly what a love story should be: real, hard-won, and absolutely, completely true.